I want to welcome everyone here and thank you for joining us this evening. It's really a true delight to be able to partner with the Manchester Historical Society. This is actually the first of 4 programs that we have scheduled with them. Today's presenters are Bill Badger and Shawn Harrington. Let me just tell you a little bit about Shawn. He serves as curator of the Manchester Historical Society. Over the past 8 years, he has been digitizing thousands of pieces in the Manchester Historical Society's collection to use for outreach and education at local schools, as well as in print and social media. He has worked for the past 2 decades in the financial services industry with a tenure as a member of the New York Stock Exchange. We're happy to have you here with us, Shawn. Thank you.
Thanks, Gloria. Really wonderful to be here. Thank you very much for having us. You know, a lot of work went into planning these events we have coming up. Much thanks to Kim, who's actually on here too, who's a member of the board of directors of the Manchester Historical Society. This is being recorded, and I will tell you right now that Bill is going to be governed a little bit, and he could probably spend an hour on each of these slides, but I'm here to make sure that we keep things moving along. But he's an absolute wealth of knowledge when it comes to anything to do with the railroads, not only here in Manchester, but regionally, New England, and in general. So this is as much a treat for me to be able to be here right next to him. And we have a lot of slides. We're going to go through these quickly. The idea is this is being recorded, so you can go back and watch. You can ask questions, and most importantly, you can reach out to us afterwards. So with no further ado, Gloria, I'm going to start sharing the screen.
Sure.
And I am going to turn this over to Bill. All right, Bill, it's all yours.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming tonight. People are always asking me, how'd you get interested in trains? And I say, I have no clue. My parents said when I was a little kid riding in the car, they would try to point out cows and pigs and horses, and all I would say is choo-choo car tracks. So somewhere along the line, it wasn't in the family. I just got interested. Tonight, I'm going to try to run through fairly quickly the railroad action around Manchester. Much of it was taking place 100 years ago. Some of it's still around. And just as an overview, we'll have questions at the end. And then if you're still interested, get involved in the Historical Society. First, I think it's kind of, maybe as a starter, in the early 21st century, do we really understand the importance of the railroad? And this picture isn't Manchester, it's of Jamaica, the West River Valley. But if you look at this and you say, well, what are my options to go anywhere, move anything anywhere? On the left is your basic dirt road. Mud in the spring and fall, sleds in the winter, and dusty and nasty in the summer. On the right is the river, which doesn't look like it could float any more than a canoe. And maybe logs down in the fall, but in the spring, but it's a one-way trip. And then along comes the magic carpet made of steel, right down the middle. And who wouldn't want that for their town? And every town did. If you could get a railroad, it was happening. As far as Manchester goes, and Shawn said it was probably a good idea to read these because I saw a number of iPhones and stuff up. If you're trying to read this on a phone, I'll kind of describe it. The Western Vermont Railroad was built from Rutland to North Bennington, finished in 1852, and then on to Bennington in 1853. And in the remainder of the 19th century brought various leases, reorganizations, and it was primarily known as the Bennington and Rutland Railroad. In 1901, it was rolled into the Rutland Railroad, being formed by William Seward Webb, the Shelburne Farms. He married a Vanderbilt. They were into railroads, and he put together the Rutland from a number of smaller railroads. And the B&R was now part of a much bigger system. But they were overnight passenger trains between New York and Montreal, milk trains serving New York, and regular freight service. But with the general decline in the 1950s was the end of passenger service in 1953 and the end of all operations in a 1961 strike. And the state of Vermont very foresightly acquired the track, mostly in Vermont, and leased it to the Vermont Railway, who operates it to this day. Just a quick overview of this is a 1914 Rutland map. Here's Rutland. Manchester's down here, and I'm not very good with this pointer. Bennington, and then the line all the way down to Chatham, which gave them connections to New York City. The line over to Bellows Falls, which was the east connection with connections to Boston. Then on up, there was a old railroad that had gone over to Fort Ticonderoga that became the Addison branch of the Rutland. A connection up through Nolan Junction to Montreal, across the top of the lake to Rouse's Point, and out to Ogdensburg. And then importantly, if you can read it here, it says Rutland Transit Company. And down here it says Rutland Transit Company. The Rutland Railroad had lake boats, and through Ogdensburg they could go to Chicago or wherever they needed, and they had a number of grain elevators in Ogdensburg, and this was their connection. But unfortunately, that died in 1915, and we'll get to that. Early street side picture, I'm thinking the 1870s of the Manchester station. You can see that it's starting to get a little weather beaten. It was, in its day, it was a very high style Carpenter Gothic building with the spires and gingerbread, which is proceeded to get knocked off by wagons. Stiff leg crane out here. And this building is not part of the station. That's the woodshed. This 1872 lithograph gives a nice overview. Here's Burnburton, here's Manchester Village, and here's the depot with not a lot going on yet, but here's the station. Here's the woodshed. This is Fullerton's Marble, the first non-railroad business building in the depot. This is, what's the restaurant called?
Yeah, today it's Firefly.
Firefly.
Yeah, just in case anybody was wondering, the depot station is where RK Miles is today.
Right, and my RK Miles headquarters is in Fullerton's Marble, and where Yarns for Your Soul was, the very distinctive roof on this building. About 1890, looking into the village from Richville Road, a little pony truss here, a small version of a covered bridge. There's the station. There's the covered bridge. This was an enclosed water tower with a windmill that pumped water up out of the Battenkill sawmill. And now we're starting to see development in the depot, because again, the depot was where it was at. This was where the future was. Now the picture of the station, it's starting to be modified over the years. The windows and the dormers upstairs were for the agent. The agent had it was very common in this era, the agent had an apartment upstairs. And around 1900, there was a park that grew up in the front. RK Miles building is here now, main building. But this was a park that grew up from kind of leftover space. Here's the station. Looks like there's a train in the station because you can't see underneath it. Fullerton's Marble Mill over here. Fullerton was 1867, was the first non-railroad business that said, this is where I want to be. So it's now the RK Miles headquarters building. You could see he was displaying their wares out front and in the windows on the second floor. And Fullerton was foresighted enough to say, well, you know what? The things are going to happen here. So he built this building as a store that's now Fireflies. And the station is over here. It doesn't have its covered platform yet. It's just the basic box.
And Fullerton was a very industrious guy. If you go to Dellwood Cemetery, you can see hundreds of examples of his work, both in Dellwood, especially Factory Point. He sent monuments all around the East Coast. If you've been up to Peru and seen the monument up there, the Stark Monument, that's actually was made in Manchester Depot. This is a fun picture that I wanted to put in here. This is 9 teams of horses delivering just the base of the Soldiers Monument that stands in front of the Congregational Church. Mr. Fullerton is standing right here in the fur coat. He was very proud of it. He considered his crowning achievement in the monument business was that monument that we see in front of the Congregational Church you drive by. But if you figure how tall that is, it took 18 horses just to draw it from the station up to Manchester Village. I just absolutely love this picture.
And one more kind of overview from a Sanborn insurance map. Here's the station. There's they call it the arcade, the covered platform, the freight depot. This was all woodshed. Engines burned wood back then. And this was all cordwood, where the park became later was all full of cordwood out here. They went through a lot of wood and various basic industries, private freight station, coal. Fullerton's is over here. And lining up down the street are all the residences because this was where you wanted to be. About, I think, early 20th century, the old water tower has been replaced with a new water tower. The platform has been rebuilt, a little more modern. And here's a southbound flyer coming in. This is slightly earlier because it's the old water tower and the windmill. That's not a TV dish. Just typical of the era, small engine, a lot of traffic. And this is now we're getting a very similar shot. And this is the new water tower. Here's a milk platform. This was the milk train. And it looks like they're loading milk cars, milk cans here. They were a little careless about the empties, just threw them out. Over here is a stock pen, upper and lower. They were probably sheep. Rutland had both single deck and double deck cars. Here's the hotel. Every town had a railroad. You had to have a railroad hotel.
And that was the Battenkill Inn, which was built in 1905, which helps us date this photograph. And then, of course, it burned down in 1993 as Grabbers.
With the whole idea of the railroad came, there were opportunities. So in 1901, the Battenkill Valley Lumber Company acquired, and it's anywhere from 20,000 to 30,000 acres of land up south of Stratton, and built a 6-mile flume to bring down pulpwood. And if you look at this is the main line of the Rutland. This is Richville Road. And here's the spur coming off, crossing, and disappearing up there. There's still, if you look when the leaves are off the trees, you can see a little bit of the embankment here. And here's a boxcar sitting out there.
So the fun little story about this picture is, as I go through the collection every once in a while, this is just a crop of a much larger photograph. And down here on the bottom, just to give you an idea where this is Union Street. This is the Union Street. This is the bridge that crosses the Battenkill River. Now, look through these pictures and I'll find it. And I see this boxcar sitting out in the middle of the field. And I'll quickly send it off to Bill and say, Bill, guess what I found? And then, of course, us and probably 3 other people on here would be, now that is really interesting stuff. And then we have to track down, well, where was it going and what was it used for? So, which we've managed to do, reverse engineered it.
That's right. And if you wonder what a 6-mile flume looked like, that was part of the 6-mile flume. Just a lot of work, and a lot of wood. And at the bottom, it was chaos. All the logs were coming down and piling up, and these guys seem to have some sort of tools up here and here to snag the logs and load the boxcars. And you wonder how many pinched fingers there were, or beat up shins. Or it must have been a zoo, and it all happened fast. This is something I found on eBay, and it was one of these things. Oh, there's a picture. I know what that is. This car is probably loaded, and they've let it down, and these cars are being loaded.
Yeah,
but it was, you couldn't do it in winter because everything was frozen. One assumes they had enough water to do it in summer. But anyway, it didn't really work out. And by 1907, the company was bankrupt. But remember the land. We'll get back to that. Barnumville was a busy place in its day. A lot of charcoal was loaded there for the Barnum and Richardson Iron Company down in Connecticut. And as you may know, the mountains around here were just stripped off for charcoal for the iron making business. And if you're bringing it down from where the Long Trail crosses, you walk up by the Long Trail and you'll see a lot of places the dirt is black. That was charcoal. There were kilns up there. And Barnumville was closer than, it was the first place you hit the railroad. So there were sidings there. They were loading charcoal cars, and the good residents of Barnumville decided they wanted a station. So they built the building, but the Rutland Railroad wasn't really interested in taking over. It would have been the Bennington Rutland then, because it was too close to Manchester. So they said, no thanks. And it kicked around, eventually got moved a little bit away from the track, and King Reed used it for storage for his circus. And eventually the Manchester Fire Department burned it down as an exercise. 1970 or something?
Yeah, but they did actually save the door with the painting of the horse that you can see there, and that actually was mounted on the barn behind Reed's house, which is still there. A lot of people will notice the Brick Tavern on Barnumville. If you drive past the Brick Tavern by Ivan Beatty's house and you look out back, you'll still see that horse on the back barn.
Give you some idea of this stuff that was going on. There were a lot of express companies. You want Monkey Wards or Sears Roebuck were shipping stuff. Well, it came by train. And this was the American Railway Express. All the little express companies merged into REA, Railway Express Company, I think around 1930. But this was a smaller one, and they were delivering the logical way in winter in a sled. You can see the station behind it, and at this point, Fullerton's is gone, and the express company is in the Fullerton building. Coal, Ryan and Sleater, where R.K. Miles is now, had a home heating fuel business, and coal silos. They're in decay here, but they were brought in by hopper car and filled various different grades of coal. And across the road was Heaslip's fuel oil. And the interesting thing was that there was no railroad connection to it, but the railroad stopped on the south side of the tracks, and there were hose connections there and pipes under the highway. So you bring tank cars in on one side of the road and pump the oil to the other. And there's the Battenkill Inn, the railroad hotel. You saw the earlier picture of the milk cans. Well, in 1921, the Bennington County Cooperative Creamery built a plant at the end of Lincoln Avenue. And this was a processing plant. Milk would be brought in by the farmers, graded, and then processed and shipped down to New York in railroad tank cars. There's some trucks bringing their cans up. You even see a little bit of, this guy was hanging some cans off the back of his truck. And this is an early picture, and I can kind of tell it's early, besides being under construction. This was the ice house, which didn't last too long. I think they went to electric refrigeration. And here's the creamery. They obviously had a steam plant, but the unfinished dock and some cans here. But this railroad car is a can car, not a bulk car. So I think at this point they didn't have the plant working yet, but they were accepting cans and just shipping them down to New York. And how they got down to New York, dumped, cleaned, and sent back and got back to the farm is amazing. And sorry, it's a little bit fuzzy, but this was the southbound milk train, would be train number 88. It was 88 all its life. 87 was the empties coming back. And it's enough traffic that we had two engines, slightly different class, and the milk cars. And who knows how long the train was behind it. But that was the milk. And the milk was important. It was big business on the Rutland. Across from the station, there seems to have been a sawmill forever. And it was Bradley's, then it was Manchester Lumber, and it was Sweezy's at the end. And unfortunately, the wind was just not quite right. Otherwise, it's a great picture. Probably the turn of the 20th century, putting some cars into the sawmill. It was probably Bradley's at this point. And I keep saying, everything happened at the station. Anybody who went into town or came from town probably came by train. And who knows what the event was here, but somebody deserved to be greeted by the band.
We actually have one of those hats in our collection.
How come you're not wearing it tonight?
I should have brought it. You're not wearing your engineer's cap either.
That's true. This was, in its day, a lot of big traffic, heavy traffic rolled through here. Not the New York Central Main Line, but certainly a lot of traffic. This is the southbound Green Mountain Flyer with an almost new number 83. They needed bigger engines because you saw the milk train. They had needed 2 engines. Well, if you can do it with 1 engine, it saves on crew and much more efficient. So this was practically a new engine, 83 at its time, and the local freight, 50 over on the sideline waiting for it. And the picture I have written on the back is the summer of 1930, but Phil Jordan has the same picture, and he understood that Ray Hazeltine, the engineer on the freight train, had walked across and taken the picture himself, and it was 1932, but it doesn't matter. It's close. And on the, make this work, lumber mill over here, and if anyone is really interested, it's a Pullman right behind the tender, and it would have been deadheaded because baggage cars were always up front, baggage and mail, and it would have been deadheaded somewhere they needed to move a car.
And today, when you go into the RK Miles lumberyard, you cross one track.
Right. And there were many then. We think it's 1938. Skiers waiting for the down train, taking it back to New York. I mean, roads were pretty minimal back then, and if you wanted to get up here in any amount of time, you took the train. And the first ski train had run, a special train had run in 1938, January, I think 1938, and it was Pullman cars out of New York. And you arrived at something like 5:30 in the morning. And then you skied for the weekend. You stayed at local inns, and you got on the train at 5 o'clock and headed back to New York, and you got in like 11 o'clock at night in the city. It was pretty convenient, and there weren't a lot of other options. This may or may not be wartime. Again, we have dates on these, but I question a little bit because I think, this looks like a Pullman porter at his car, and parlor cars came off in 1942 with the war. So this may be pre-43, but it's winter, a lot of fur coats, but no skis. Well, I take that back. There might be some skis down here. However, this was ski business. And I think what we're looking at here is a couple of extra cars that were tacked on the back of the regular Green Mountain Flyer. It'd be 3 o'clock in the afternoon and loading up with people. And even after passenger service was gone, the station was kind of in decay, not much going on. The Manchester, Vermont Ski Center sign still survived, and I wish I knew where it went because it'd be great to have.
You could show up in some of these barns someday.
You may well. Yeah, absolutely. Again, the stuff that went on. This was a special train for General Wing, who was a Rutland guy before World War II. And it was just a whistle-stop tour. I don't remember what the event was, but you came to the station, and this is where people gathered, where events happened. And in the late 40s and early 50s, the Chatham Exchange Club ran a special, I think first in North Bennington, and then in later years it went all the way to Rutland. And this is the last one. They found every piece of rickety equipment they could drag out and put on train. I think it had a caboose or two on the end, And it was just a special excursion. People loved it. But this was the end of steam on the railroad, and so after that, and the Chatham division was torn up in '53. So this was the end. Here's a northbound flyer. Traffic was dwindling. It's a short train. And just for those who don't know, it's one of those pictures that pops up and you go, ooh, I know where that is, because there's the coal, Ryan and Schleter's coal silos in the background. This is one of the Rutland, I think by the looks of it, it's Rutland number 77, one of the smaller 10-wheelers. But they were bringing down the water. This was the standpipe between the tracks. Here's again the edge of the standpipe right here. And I think that the first car back was express car. Your stuff from Sears, then a mail baggage combine and a passenger car. Not a lot of traffic by the end. However, there was always exception. There's a northbound train with a lot of head-end equipment. Not a lot of, it looks like 2 coaches on the back, but they were, and it wasn't, if the leaves were off the trees, I would say it was the Christmas rush, but don't know why so much baggage or express moving out. I mentioned briefly the Panama Canal Act. What that said is that a form of transportation couldn't compete with itself. And specifically, if you think about the Panama Canal, the canal company couldn't own the railroad that ran parallel to it, because that wasn't competition, that was just monopoly. So in 1915, they passed the Panama Canal Act. Well, the problem was that the Rutland was at that point controlled by the New York Central. And the New York Central ran to Chicago. And the Rutland's boats ran to Chicago. So all of a sudden, the New York Central was competing with itself with both boats and trains. And the Rutland had to give up the boats. And, Rutland's always been ran through a rural area, not a lot of industry like Pennsylvania or Ohio or somewhere with a lot of industrial core. So they struggled on through the Depression, and they finally filed for bankruptcy in 1938. But then sort of struggled on under receivership until 1950, when it was reorganized as a Rutland Railway as opposed to railroad. And then the next year, they started bringing in cost-saving diesels, and a strike in 1953 provided the opportunity to end passenger service, which they were delighted to do. And so a leaner, more modern Rutland, they got some modern steel equipment, and they went on to somebody's drawing on their screen.
Yeah, Robert's iPhone.
But they went on in some good years through the 50s, but then again, they were trying to be more efficient, and with new work rules, 1961, the railroad was shut down, and they couldn't come up with a solution, and it was abandoned. And that was when the state of Vermont stepped in and bought parts of the Rutland trackage in Vermont, and the section from Bennington to Burlington was leased to the Vermont Railway. And this is a picture from an unknown artist. It looks like Howard Fogg, but apparently it's not. It gives you an idea of the 1950s Rutland. The diesels, green and yellow diesels, and Manchester Station. It worked for a few years. And just something we couldn't resist. And this was just a bad day. One of Sweezy's trucks tried to occupy the same space as a southbound Rutland train. The driver was unhurt. It was Pete Wyman, I think, wasn't it? And probably pretty embarrassed. And it's a short train that has me a bit confused. It's got a milk car, which I assume was coming down to the creamery. It's got a baggage car, which may have been express, and a caboose. So I'm not sure what was going on there. And in early 1964, the Vermont Railway began operations on the old B&R. This, I'm not sure if it's the first train, but it may well be, because they're running a flanger right behind the engine, which was for scraping out snow and ice between the rails. It looks like they've dropped their train. The back of the train is back here. They're probably setting out a car for Sweezy's. After the end of passenger service, and again, this may not be obvious, the coal silos are still here, but Railway Express cut a door in the side of the station so they could back their truck end out of the rain as long as they had Railway Express here. It lasted here for a while and then moved up to where Dan's Auto Parts was, and then eventually down to Bennington. And then they, in the early 70s, I think they were out of business, and FedEx and UPS took over the business. The trouble with the REA, it was a great business, but it was based on their transportation system was railroad passenger trains. And once they were gone, they kind of didn't have distribution anymore. So they couldn't come up with another way of doing business. Early Vermont railway years, winter's always entertaining. They were bringing a plow through. There are other period. Phil Jordan took these pictures. There are others in the series of digging out switches and basically coping with winter. And again, Phil took this from the top of the creamery of a southbound train.
So the creamery is still there, and over on the left-hand side of this photo, you can see one of the original municipal water plants, which is there now now abandoned because they replaced it. It's down off Battenkill Lane. But I lived at the end of Lincoln Avenue in the early 1990s in an apartment down there, and the old creamery building was, Cat Country was in there for a little while, and it's been in, I think, the phone company was in there.
Alpine Slide for a while.
Alpine Slide was there for a while. So the building is still there. It's been added on to a number of times, but the creamery building is still there. And when you walk down in the back, you can see, you can see where the spur was. It's kind of interesting. This is a great shot.
Another of Phil's shots not long after Vermont Railway took over operations. It's not the best picture, but it gives you an idea of the Rutland equipment lived on. And here it is being switched out at Sweezy's. The Vermont Railway was basically it's a freight railroad, but they don't mind running special passenger excursions. They'll do whatever the business is there. That's the beauty of small railroads, is they're not hung up like the great big Class 1 modern railroads that will only do big long trains and aren't interested in local business. So in the early 60s, they had a use of someone's steam engine. They ran some steam specials. This one I think was, I can't remember the railroad it came from, but it was number 97, and it arrived in Burlington in not very good shape, and the shop crew referred to it as the wreck of old 97. Mostly the traffic on down here at that point was pretty much local stuff. Whitman's Feed in North Bennington, and Miles got some stuff. I think Mac Molding got some pellet cars of plastic, Sweezy's. But it wasn't much through traffic. It was just whatever local traffic needed to come down the branch. However, they changed traffic patterns. They used to ship a lot out through Whitehall, and the Canadian Pacific took over D&H and started charging them too much to switch there. So they said, okay, we'll just clean up the connection through North Bennington to Hoosick Junction and start bringing out stuff there. And that's when we started to see bigger trains, and a lot of these, I have a hard time with this thing, a lot of these slurry cars, which were coming from Omea and Florence. At one point, they were running 50 cars a week up to Waterville, Maine for paper. And so you'd see the cars, they'd gather them up in North Bennington, and then when they got 50 cars, they would take them down to Hoosick Junction and pass them off. Still running special trains. This was there are a number of private cars owned privately, old railroad cars, business cars, and these guys get together several times a year, hire a train, and move around. And I've been invited on one of them. It was absolute blast. It's a luxurious way to go. And this was the private owners special train headed south somewhere. This was a carnival train. It took me a while looking at pictures trying to figure out what a circus trains used to be a big deal. The circus moved by rail. And I think the advantage was you put it all on a train, it all went together, and you unpacked it at the next city, set it back up again, and you didn't have to worry about a wagon broke down or a truck broke down or somebody didn't get here. It all arrived. It was all on the train. And the Ringling Brothers was the last one. They don't do it anymore. But this was a carnival train. 2017, Cully caught it in Manchester. I don't know any of the history of it, but one look at it, you go, oh, we have a carnival train. I have no idea what these are except overgrown Hershey's Candy Kisses or something. Some special load headed northbound. The Vermont Railway is chronically short on power. And so you see interesting diesels show up. This is leased power. It's an old Union Pacific engine, still in Union Pacific colors, that somewhere on the side it'll have Union Pacific's painted out, and it has, it's the leasing company. But you see all kinds of strange stuff. It's a Heinz 57 varieties. In 2019, the Vermont National Guard put together several huge trains of their equipment and shipped them down to Fort Polk, Louisiana for exercises. And the train, interestingly, got trapped at Emerald Lake, one of the trains. I'm not sure it's the first one or the second one, because of high water in East Dorset. We'd had heavy rains, it flooded the track, and diesel locomotives, the axles are an electric motor, and you can't go through a lot of water without shorting them out. So the trains were stuck there for a day or so until they opened up and got some of the water moved out, and then they moved the engines around and pushed the train through the water and picked it up at the south end with engines they had in North Bennington. So it was kind of exciting for a few days. In late winter of 2020, there was a partial collapse of Hoosick Tunnel in North Adams, and that's the main artery between Boston and the West. And so, what do you do when you're blocked up? So they started running bypass detour trains up from North Bennington through Manchester to Rutland, then put the engines on the other end, towed them down to Bellows Falls and down to East Deerfield to put them back on the old Boston and main line to send them back into Boston and vice versa. So we saw an incredible amount of traffic coming through for about a month and a half. I have no idea on this lightweight track why nothing fell off, but they managed to pull it off. I think this is 8 locomotives on the front, and some of the trains had pushers or mid-train power also. A lot of traffic and interesting stuff. Here's one, Norfolk Southern engines by Peterson's Mill, just in Manchester. Not something we see up here every day. Modern power, moving the bypass trains, the detour trains. And there's still special trains. Every winter, except for last winter with COVID, they've been running the Elf Express. And last winter, because they couldn't run the Elf Express or anything, the railroad, they're civic-minded guys. They dragged out the last Rutland engine, still usable. It had been drained for the winter and put away for winter, so they towed it with another engine and just decorated it and a little homemade observation car behind it and dragged it all over their system just as a Christmas spirit. We can't run special Christmas trains, so we're running this as a display.
My kids thought it was awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty. I took a picture of it during the day, and Cully came up with this one at night. And I said, "That's much better." But normally, we see just the normal train daily down and back, and a bit of a trivia question. This is RC2 and CR1. RC2 is down, and CR1 is back. Well, what's that mean? Well, Rutland always named their trains. We're going back 60 years now. The Rutland named their trains so that the southbound trains were even numbers, the northbound trains were odd numbers. And this is RC is Rutland Chatham. They haven't run a train to Chatham for 60 years, but they kept the old designations. So it's RC2 is the southbound to North Bennington, and RC1 is the northbound back up again. So it's a little bit of the Rutland 60 years on, still living. RK Miles still gets deliveries now and then by rail.
That looks like a spare tire on a Land Rover in the foreground.
You can tell who took the picture. And the station is still there. On the Miles side, it has doors cut into it. It's a storage building. But if you walk around the track side, it still looks like the station. And they just enclosed the passenger platform. You go inside, it's still the passenger platform, but they sell outdoor furniture and stuff in there. And now, it isn't technically a railroad, but I was fascinated when I was looking through the Historical Society pictures one time and saw some pictures of Bradley's mill with wires up overhead. And one would assume, I looked picture and looked more, found they were actually running a little box cab electric engine, that it would reduce the chance of fire that a steam locomotive might present in the yard. It's also just convenient to have. You need to move some cars around, you just put the pole up, move it around, and pull a pole. You wouldn't have to have a fire going in a steam engine all day long. And it probably began when Manchester got electricity around 1900, and one of these photos is 1917, so it was still functioning at that date. Here's the trolley wire running here. And my assumption is, after World War I and the availability of heavy duty but not very fast trucks, they could probably get used Army trucks and didn't need the electric anymore. They could just use trucks around the yard. But there's the little box motor with its trolley pole up. And it's pushing, it looks like an in-mill car, just moving stuff around. If they had to move lumber out or move logs in, this was a handy way of doing it. The Rutland's connection was over here. So this was pretty much in the yard. In 1903, actually before that, Norcross West Company, 1902 got the
1900.
1900.
In 1901, they were up here looking for it, and
they got the contract to supply the marble for the New York Public Library. So then they had to go find it. They got it. They had to find it, and they found it in South Dorset. And the Norcross Company was a big construction company. They teamed up with West in Dorset, who was a geologist, and they opened up near where this early map is. The earliest quarry may well have been this one, or the earliest quarry maybe in the United States. So this is the same vein of marble. They were just over here, and they worked the main quarry, and then they worked the plateau quarry, and they tried. We're going to be talking on this again in the end of August in much more detail, a lot more pictures. But they tried it with horses and realized they couldn't move enough marble fast enough to make it work. So in 1903, they built 5 miles of railroad they built a big finishing plant in Manchester Depot. They built up to their South Dorset quarries. And once the library project had been done, they supplied marble for a number of other projects. West died, and
Spafford died in 1906, and then his son Ernie took over.
And then Norcross was, I think we would say now, dementia.
Yeah, he was, going fishing in the swimming pool type of thing.
Yeah, wasn't with it anymore. So, so West's son Ernie was trying to sell it desperately, and finally Vermont Marble bought it in 1913, basically on the premise that they were just buying up the competition. And by 1917, there wasn't the demand. They could supply the demand from their big quarries up in the Proctor Florence, West Rutland area. And so they shut the quarry down in 1917. And in 1934, the rails were pulled up. And just as to give you there was no map of it, so I had to do my own. But here's the mill down in the depot, where Earth and Sea is now. And then it came up, crossed under Barnumville Road, up behind the
Northshire Day School.
The day school, across into the where the rink is now, and then crossing Aeolus and North Road, and then just out through the woods, crossing right at the bottom of Morse Hill Road, and again parallel to the. Used to be able to see some bridge abutments on crossroads, but I think they've taken them out because they were narrow, and then to the quarries in South Dorset. This is Morse Hill Road. Some of the work crew, looks like they're shoveling off. Could be cinders. They use a lot of cinders for ballast and stuff, but they're sort of heavy on manpower, pushing a work train up. They bought a second-hand engine from the Rutland Railroad. It was actually built when Central Vermont controlled the Rutland, but it was old and tired, but they cleaned it up and made it work for them. And loading at the plateau, the upper quarry, loading a 30-ton monolith. Now, a lot of these old wooden cars, and you'll see a few other pictures of them. This is a Rutland car. The MD&G bought a mess of second-hand Rutland cars. And I had to think they were probably 25 or 30-ton cars. They were happily loading 30 or 40 tons on them without worrying about it. But
no OSHA back then.
No OSHA back then. Just load them up. There's another one of the monoliths, and the sea of stiff-leg derricks out behind, and a smokestack from a steam boiler here, supplying steam for the chandlers.
And we do actually have names for all of them that was supplied by the Dorset Historical Society. So if anybody really needs to know, you can shoot us an email.
There's a train in South Dorset, and they were a common carrier. They carried passengers, they carried baggage, they carried freight. They figured, well, we're here, let's see what we can do. And Terry Tyler likes to tell the story that the railroad bought the land. They didn't just take right away over. They bought the land, and they were having some trouble buying from some of the farmers. Well, as in every railroad back then, you set your sights high. So there was the Western and the Pacific, and everybody who was planning to go far beyond. So the Manchester and Dorset wasn't thinking that grand. They thought just Granville. And Terry tells a story that they would approach the farmers and say, Granville, the drinking age is less. You could, ride the train over and have a few. Probably not true, but it's a great story. Another picture of number one with Owl's Head and Green Peak in the background. It's easy to picture where some of these are. And this is a picture in March 1916. There was a blizzard, and they ran a little plow train up there to the quarries. And it's a coach with a plow on the end, the engine's on the other, and they're going back at this point because obviously they've plowed. And this picture's been around forever, and the rock is noteworthy. And I was walking through the woods, walking the line one time, and there was the rock. And I said, aha, I got you. I know where the picture was taken.
It's just off North Road.
Yep. And here's the track crew out working on the track. It's a pretty basic track. It's just, nothing fancy. And this is at the quarry station. And if you look at this, there are a string of boxcars. So again, the railroad was taking opportunity. They have a railroad. And if somebody in Dorset or beyond wanted some freight, well, they would be glad to bring the boxcar up and shove it out the end of track, and you could unload it and bring it back. This Route 30 is here now. It's under the road, as far as I can tell. This was the South Dorset Depot, which is right about where North Road, not North Road, Morse Hill Road comes down. Same building. Now, we had never seen, but these two have been around. Okay, we know what their little shelters, you can't call them a station, look like. But what about Manchester? Did they go out on the main line to the Rutland station? I doubt it. But what was Manchester? And then Shawn came up with, we'll get to that in a second. First, in between, as we head down the line, I should look ahead and see where my pictures are coming. They crossed Barnumville Road. And still underneath the fill is this marble bridge. I think they took the bridge out, filled around it, filled over. The tracks were gone at that. This was in the 1960s.
Early 60s.
It was a one-lane bridge, and it was dangerous, and so it was gone. But this was the crossing of Barnumville. And this is at the, you can see the cemetery behind it.
Yeah, the big factory point. Who would have just crossed now Spruce Street and would have been
headed up the Gulf.
Heading up the Gulf.
And the Gulf is the narrow. If you go across Barnumville Road and stop and look down in there, it's hard to see this time of year, but when the leaves are off the trees, you can see the embankment. That was the Gulf, and that's where the railroad ran up. Now, there is the Manchester station, the Manchester shelter. Got it. You know, one of these bigger pictures, you look at it and you go, wait, what's that? There it is. Here's the crossing sign. This is discount beverages right in here.
So the big white building in the center of the foreground is now Ted's Barbershop is in there. Some of the older folks will remember it as Muggers. It's been Manchester Carpet Care was in there for a while, but today's Ted's Barbershop and Greener Pasture Smoke Shop. And just to give you an idea how clear it was in the upper left corner here, this building is at the top of Highland Avenue. So this is the Joe Fowler's house, and it was the Highland Inn for a little while. Yep. But again, this is an example
that's
of
the Highland. That's the road going right up there.
And this is another example. You find a big picture, and then hidden within the picture is something that is unique. And so there's the Manchester station for the MD&G.
Also in the same area was the Norcross West Marble Plant. And this is Barnumville Road. No, sorry, Richville Road that we're on. And the railroad crossing. I always like to look at pictures and sort of see what are the little things we're looking at. And those who may not know, these are cattle crossings. You can't string a fence across the railroad. Well, you can. Next train will take it out. So you bring the fence along, stop it here, and then there are bars here and with the cloven hoofs.
Click on it so they can see. There you go.
With the cloven hooves, the cattle can't walk across there. So there's fence on each side, and you can't cross the cattle crossing. Another picture looking up. Here's back on the... There's the cattle crossing we looked at. Richville is out here. Here's the plant. Here, the overhead crane. Some piece of tired equipment here and a lot of marble. And there's the bat and kill. Bat and kill in here. And there's a little interesting piece. When you came along with a hand car and wanted to lift it out and put it onto here where the section crew kept their equipment, this thing was kind of like a turntable. It would push up underneath it. You could swing it 90 degrees and roll it off. Another view of the plant, and the office building still exists. When the plant went out of business, it was moved across the road, not even turned, move across the road. And if you drive on Richville Road and look at it today, you can see that building's there. Everything else is gone. Sort of looking into the mill, the marble. This was the MD&G's engine house. And They had this overhead crane. You can see just the part of it there. And a lot of marble. A lot of marble. And a lot of it's still there. If you look in the bushes, better look when the leaves are off the tree, leaves are off the bushes, and beware of ticks. I can tell you about that. This was a view from the top of a boxcar, and you can see, I don't know what it is, but it was Center Hill, past and present.
Past and present, it's now a shared community workspace building. But yeah, it's right at the foot of Center Hill, and the cemetery.
Cemetery's up there. And in its day, the mill was the state of the art. And West told his kids, you guys will be making from this money from this plant for years to come. And the problem was that Vermont Marble didn't need it. They had more state of the art stuff up the road. So it was shut down and demolished in the 30s.
Yeah. 36 it came down.
And now a mile of it is a rail trail. And in the bushes, I should have taken a picture when the leaves were off the trees, there's the rock. When the leaves are off the bushes and stuff, it's the rock.
And if you visit the rail trail, there's actually a little signpost there that actually has that picture.
There's a
so
picture.
You'll be able to see it. It's a lot of fun.
You know, when they were doing the trail, I said, "Do you recognize this?" And they went, "Oh my God!" And the quarry is now the swimming hole where half of the state seems to swim.
And half the other states.
And half the other states, right. Yeah. It certainly changed from its quiet days. And finally, for our last railroad, you remember the land where they ran the flume down from up behind Stratton. Well, the timber was still there. So the Rich Lumber Company they were a logging company, and they'd been out in Wanakana, New York, and they moved here. They bought stumpage for 12,000 acres of land to cut the spruce, and they built 16 miles of railroad up East Mountain through Liebrook. And they had 2 Shea locomotives, which were geared locomotives, and they're suited for rough track and steep grades. They were bringing a lot of people in to work for it, so they built basically a company town. And many of those, the one on the right's the exception, the one on the left's the exception, the others are still there. And they built a mill. And this gives you a connection between the two. This is Richville. This is the settlement. Casteris. Now there's the Rutland main line out here. Here's the village. There's the Congregational Church. Whoops, up here. And here's the mill. And this is Richville Road going down here. And it was a steep railroad. Steep, windy railroad. It was built as a logging railroad. There was no permanence intended here. It was built to last as long as the timber did, and then they didn't care anymore. And if you look at the picture here, you get an idea. These are just logs. There's no fancy ties or creosote treated. They just hewed off a flat surface and spiked the rail down, and away you went. And when they were through logging an area, they pull the track up and move it to somewhere else. It was what else are you going to do? Horses were the other option, and they didn't have tractors and equipment at this point big enough to really do anything else. And railroad was the way logging was done on a big scale. And the track was rough and steep. And here's a frosty morning, and it would have taken a lot of sand to push those cars up that, or they were pulling those cars. They came up the line and left, pushing, and then pulled up in the switchback. It's a switchback to get height. It's like a Z.
So at the Historical Society, we did a hike along to this point. Bob Weeble actually was instrumental in saying, we need to go out and show you that, because I thought it was a little bit higher up. But so I've actually walked this switchback. It's washed out in a number of areas. But if you've gone to Liebrook Falls ever and hiked, the last stretch before you get to the falls, you're actually walking along the switchback. If you look down along the edge of the hill to your left, if you're walking towards Live Falls, just that last stretch, you'll notice railroad ties sticking up through the ground. It's kind of fun. So if you ever go up there, keep your eyes open and you'll see the railroad ties.
And if you park at the bottom and start up, the first section you're walking on is also the railroad bed. And then the railroad bed sort of veers off to the right. I always used to walk up the railroad bed and back on the trail. It's slower, but you see more. This was Shea number 6, 40 ton. And for anyone who doesn't know, it's obviously the steam boiler here, but instead of conventional cylinders driving drive wheels, it had 3 cylinders on the side that drove a crankshaft and gears on the wheels. So it was very flexible, very slow, but powerful. And so it looks like they've got a little work car here. They're probably getting this rock out of the way. Coming up the mountain, pushing a string of empty bunk cars. They did. One of the reasons they didn't really have many accidents, one we know of, they had air brakes. They weren't just cowboys up there. They were trying to do it right. Up at the top, loading the logs, roll them out. Oops. And just so you get an idea of the quantity of stuff coming off the mountain. And down here, I said it was a logging railroad. You have to cross a bit of a stream. Well, just crib some logs up and go across it. Don't worry about filling dirt in or anything fancy. Nope, it's just a logging railroad. And you say, okay, here's your job today. We got to load these logs. And even in winter, it's year-round. In winter, it's easier to drag logs out of the woods, but now you've got a frozen pile of logs to wrestle with. This is Rizzio's camp. Kim, you there? And here we're coming downhill across the big trestle. Down to the upper end of the switchback. You saw the lower end before. This was the upper end. So they would come ease down onto it. And this rock work on the left is still there. If you walk up there, it's first time I was there, it was deep evergreens, but a lot of that stuff has grown bigger and it's easier to see now. And then they backed down the middle leg. And boy, talk about had to have some guts to be bringing this thing down in the snow on slippery rails. But the only accident that we know of, sometimes the crew would ride on the cars. And at one point, going down in spite of air brakes, going down the middle leg, some of the cars got away from them. And the guys jumped, but they were hurt. So after that, you could ride on the cars until you got to this leg, and then you had to get in the engine and ride down in the engine until you got to the bottom, and then you get back on the cars. At the bottom, they had a dump where they were unloaded. There's another picture which has some guy standing on the logs out here. And you go, you're nuts. But they tipped the track, so it helped unload everything, and then the guys released the chains and rolled everything into the mill pond. And they had a double band sawmill. They produced a lot of lumber. And then Ryan and Schleter actually had another operation that made it into lath for plaster. And the first time I saw this, I said, what are these? Those are bundles of lath, probably being shipped out in this car. So it's a second business. And then when the mill burned, Ryan and Schleter said, now what are we going to do? So they started a lumber yard and coal and oil and everything else in town that was eventually purchased by Arcade Miles. And there's Richville, the building, the houses in the background, and the lumber in the foreground. They built these raised walkways so they could come and they had these little two-wheel carts bring lumber out and then pass it down and stack it, and then load it onto railroad cars. A lot of manual labor.
This picture is probably one of my favorite pictures. Kim's on here. This is a picture that Daley Rizzio carried in his wallet for, was it 40 or 50 years at least. So it was a tiny little snapshot, and Terry Tyler ended up with it, and I was able to scan it and from the original, and it touched it up a little bit. But just imagine taking that photograph, because the train was moving at this point. and that ledge on the left-hand side, that was pretty steep, because I mean, I've hiked along these trails, and when you stand there and you look down through the woods and you go, I don't know if I'd want to be going even 8 or 9 miles an hour sitting on a stack of logs.
Yeah, they weren't moving fast, but they were moving.
They were moving.
Another picture of loading cars in the mill yard. And then in 1919, reports came in that somebody had estimated wrong, and whether intentionally or not, but the amount of spruce that they thought they were going to have was woefully short, and they were running out of timber. And just about that time, and apparently just coincidentally, apparently it was not, who can say, but they couldn't find any evidence, the mill burned. And so the rails were pulled up. I mean, there wasn't enough timber left to rebuild and keep doing it. So the rails were pulled up, the equipment was sold off, and the show was over.
And the mill was rebuilt. The Cast Toy Company came in, and they got the stumpage rights.
But they did hardwood, didn't they?
And the stumps.
Yeah.
And so they made the little toys. We have a couple of the little toys in the collection, thanks to Herbie Wessner. But once again, so they went until about 1925, and things were kind of petering out again, and the mill burned. But that'll be a story for another time.
And I think that's in Sawmill's DNA. They burn down.
Yeah.
They always seem to burn down. But what remains, besides some of the roadbed up on the mountain, is Cast Terrace, the company housing, and some of the supervisor houses, the fancier houses across the road. The railroad, you can just make out where. Let me make sure I'm doing this right. So here's Cast Terrace, the fancier houses. But this is where the spur of the Rutland came in here and curved. Came back through here, and the company store was here, and the mill was off to the right. Oh, we slipped another picture in.
We did. I wanted to keep you on your toes.
That's right. It's a southbound train, obviously Equinox in the background, but and I'm thinking this is from it's probably late 1890s. It's 2 engines, double-headed, and but the B&R didn't have a lot of big power. So I'm thinking this is in B&R days. They had a heavy enough train to need 2 engines, but the cars are fairly new. They're not ancient, so they would work vintage 1900.
That's it.
Thank you both. That was really a wonderful presentation. We do have questions in the chat box, so I will read those. Okay, there's a question from Eric. Is there a railroad museum where we can view the trains?
There are a lot of railroad museums, but we need to be more specific, I guess. I mean, there's several in Connecticut. There was one at North Creek. It went out of business. I think the big ones are down in Pennsylvania. There's Steamtown, and there's the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania in Lancaster, and that's kind of the hotbed of where stuff is. There was Steamtown in Bellows Falls. It's long gone.
You can go see they have one of the passenger coaches up in Rutland, right? Don't they have one?
Until the kids burn it down, which will be soon, I'm sure. Hildene has a private car, Pullman car.
Right.
There are bits and pieces around. I don't know of any that are really close.
How did the original railroads acquire their right of way?
Several different ways. Mostly they got it through, I guess it would be called eminent domain. They would for public good, they would say, we need to build a railroad through here. And typically everybody in that day and age wanted it. So it was an opportunity. And they got a right of way over the land. And that then theoretically reverts back to the landowner if the railroad gives up. Some, like the MD&G, bought the land. And so it's a owned strip of land. In some cases now, the state has come, or states have come in, and when a railroad goes out, they say, but the land will not revert to the underlying owner. It will stay with the state and becomes a rail trail or some such. So if you go north out of Burlington on the old Rutland line out through the islands, that's a great bike trail. And the state has taken it, and they ended up with some serious court cases to keep it.
Is it fair to say the railroad developed due to milk run to New York, then the skier trade?
Milk was a big business. Ski trade was never huge. It was just they took opportunity of where are we going to get some passengers from. The New York Central actually did a lot of the PR work to make it happen. And Boston and Maine, New York Central, a lot of railroads did it. There was, and it may still be started again. The last ski train was running from Denver to Winter Park. And it was quite the show. And then it stopped. The railroad wasn't interested, but I think a private owner has taken it over. But really, the railroad, there wasn't a primary business. There was a lot of agriculture, a lot of logging, forest products. But we didn't have a business like the MD&G was built for marble, no question about it. That was why it was built. The rich lumber was built for logs, and they didn't carry passengers. They were just a logging railroad. But a common carrier, you took anything. And milk didn't develop until later in the game. In 1850, it wasn't in fact, the part of the Rutland, the Ogdensburg and Lake Champlain part across northern New York State, was supposedly where the refrigerator car was developed. And I think it was in the 1850s. And butter, let's say, was worth $5 a pound, or 5 cents a pound. Not much in the 1850s. However, in Boston, it was worth 25 cents a pound. So a clever farmer asked the railroad to give him a boxcar. He insulated it. He built another box inside, insulated with sawdust, put his butter in there and ice in there, shipped it to Boston and sold it for 25 cents a pound. And the railroad said, oh, we can do this too. So that's what kind of one of the businesses that came, and it was on one of the predecessors of the Rutland to develop refrigerated cars because milk didn't keep. And it wasn't until the later days that they would they have dedicated trains to milk cars. They would put some ice in there on top of them and hurry. Get there fast. Don't block the milk train.
So what role did the railroads in Manchester play in the Granville-Pulteney area slate business?
We never got there.
Oh.
It was Manchester, Dorset, and Granville, but it only got as far as the quarries in South Dorset. Never got to Granville. There was up the mountain, there was the Brattleboro and Whitehall that was supposedly planned, again, going to the west. It was going to go all the way to Whitehall and tap into the slate business out there. It got as far as South Londonderry. Never got there. I'm not sure how they would have gotten down the side of Bromley Mountain, but so no, we had no hand in the slate business.
Amy says that M. Bailey saw the earlier load of white cones. He says they were white tower parts headed north.
Wind tower.
Wind tower. Yes, wind tower.
Okay, that makes sense because they also shipped the blades by rail because they're too big to go over the highway. They're huge. So that would make sense.
Okay.
I still like the idea of them Hershey's Kisses.
It's a blow dryer.
That's right.
Let's see. This question is from Bruce. He asks, do you have more info on the band that was playing at the station in 1905? You mentioned that you have a hat in your collection. Did the town have an official band, offshoot of something like the fire department, private group for hire?
Yeah, the band was a big deal in Manchester. What we saw there was the Manchester Union Band, which was formed in 1902, actually in the depot. The band came out for all the major functions. You have to remember there was no radio, no movies, nothing like that, and the entertainment was music, theater, but it was really the band came. We have the minute books. I could probably go back and identify. We know everybody that's in the picture. It was probably Decoration Day or Memorial Day, given by the leaf coverage. But they would come out for. I mean, we have hundreds of photos of the band playing. Very intricate part of integral part of Manchester's the fabric of the community. Up until. They built the bandstand at Adams Park, and then they took it down in the 60s, and then they built another shell over in the MEMS playground area. And, there's a lot of people around here who remember as kids going to the Friday night concerts or Thursday night concerts and, beeping their horns. And it was, the band was a big part. We have instruments, we have uniforms, we have hats. It's, I'm going to stop right there.
Let's see. Was the Dorset Marble Track removal in the 1930s a civilian conservation corps project?
It was sold as scrap to a company out of Bennington, and I have the name at the tip of my tongue, and I can't think of what it is, but we know who actually tore it up, and it was just sold specifically for scrap.
This question is from John Delano. He asks, he first says, superb presentation, thank you. Have you considered using LiDAR images to see the remnants of the old roadbed that is now obscured by forest?
Oh, yeah. Because it's hard up Liebrook Hollow. It's been logged pretty much continuously, probably until whenever they made it a wilderness area. So you get on a track and you try to figure out, is this the railroad? Or is this a logging road? And one of the things that had occurred to me, the more I thought about it, is when they were logging off afterwards, why didn't they just plank over the trestles and drive on the roadbed? Well, the trestles were temporary. And I don't think anybody would want to drive a heavy log truck over something that's been rotting for the last 10 or 15 years. So they didn't. They cut their own log roads up there. So you have to look at it. And LiDAR is great. But you have to sort of sit and scratch and say, wait a minute, the railroad would have been fairly straight. What's railroad? What's logging road? And then now the next thing would be we walk up there with some sort of beacon and map it by walking on the railroad. Because there's not a really good map of, the maps we have are drawn by someone who had an idea where it went, but they're not exact.
Although we do actually have the survey of the MD&G. So if you ever really want to find out exactly where, and we actually have the survey map. I think rolled out is about 14 feet long.
Yeah. And thank you to RK Miles for scanning.
We have a digital copy of it.
Right. They said, "Ooh, this is a challenge. Let's do this."
It was interesting. If you drive down Morse Hill Road to Route 30 in Dorset, and you see, not this time of year you wouldn't be able to see, but when the leaves come down and you're parked at Morse Hill Road and you look across the road, you will see where it came across and hit the road. You'll see the raised bed.
The guy who owned the house there, the electrician, he mowed it.
Yeah,
he always kept the roadbed mowed.
Yeah,
it was perfect.
And another place you can see it if you are in Manchester and if you go to the Bank of Bennington and you look in the backyard of Center Hill Past and Present, you'll see there's a big block of marble looks like sitting in the middle of the lawn. It's actually on the rail bed. If you get out of your car and you look at it, you'll see the raised bed. And there's a maple tree I think it's a maple tree. There's a little maple tree just off the drive. And if you walk underneath that maple tree and look down, there's actually still a railroad tie with a spike stuck in it.
And when the Aspen Motel people it drove them crazy mowing the lawn, because when they had given up the railroad, they paved Route 7 without pulling the rails. So when they scrapped the railroad, they weren't about to pull the rails up. They went under the highway. So they just paved over it. So these rails stuck out that would always tangle with the mowing machine. And they finally, I think, cut them off. Just broke the end of it off so they could
She
actually.
said they slid them. They actually pulled them out.
Did they?
Yeah, they had a piece. Somebody had a piece of
Big
equipment. They pulled them out, and they're going to try. I know Robin and Bill. They're going to try to get them set up somewhere at the North Road parking lot. Yep. They're going to have a couple of the rails there. And then anybody who's lived along North Road, Mike Powers, who went through, he has a bunch of spikes because the kids
I used to collect spikes. I've got a big pile of spikes, but it's the West River, it's the MD&G, and they all look the same.
So if you do have questions, you can go to manchesterhistoricalsocietyvermont.org. Just Google us, Manchester Historical Society. Please email, reach out, give a call. If you have questions specifically for Bill, I email him usually 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, and he responds. We'll talk about that later. But, reach out to us. We're always available, always happy to exchange photos, more information, any little offshoots of this show you see. And in August, we will do, we're going to do the Norcross and West, which is really fascinating and really, really looking forward to it.
Yeah, and a lot more in depth. We've just tried to skim over stuff now. And
Right.
if anybody is really interested, we could probably do the rich lumber sometime too as a separate show.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Thank you, Shawn and Bill, for a wonderful presentation. I want to thank everyone for joining us here today. I look forward to seeing you at our next set of lectures, and have a good night.
Thanks, Gloria.
Thank you.